Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Roaster School here at Mill City. I am Joe Morocco. I am going to be your host today, and I just came from right down the street at Cafe Imports, where I am the Director of Education and one of the senior sales staff there. But you all know all of that already. What you don't know is who is sitting to my left.
Hi, I'm Eliza Lovett. I'm the head roaster for Story Coffee Company in Colorado Springs. I'm also a barista there. And I've been roasting and making coffee roasting for the past 3 years and making coffee for a very long time.
Many years.
Yes. So I was just, instead of the go grab the beer, it was like, go make me a cup of coffee kind of thing growing up. So,
Coffee slave.
Yes, exactly. And then that turned into a profession when I became old enough to get money from it.
Nice.
Yeah.
Freedom.
Exactly.
Freedom from slavery.
Exactly. It's wonderful. So yeah, and that was back in Massachusetts, and now I'm out in Colorado, and it's wonderful. And I roast on a Mill City 6 Kilo North. It's awesome. Love it.
Sick.
Yeah.
How about yourself?
I am Sydney Smith, and I own Revival Coffee Roasting Company in Baltimore. And it's super new. I started it right before Christmas. And I roast on a 2 kilogram. Is that a kilogram?
Yep.
Yeah, just making sure. Coffee roaster, and I'm just starting, so I hope that it kind of takes off, but for now, that's it.
Nice.
Yeah.
So today we're going to talk about a subject that is maybe a little bit touchy, depending on the circles you run with in the coffee roasting industry, and that is dark roasting. I realized recently that through all of the time that we have covered roasting, we really haven't delved into dark roasting. We've kind of touched on it a little, but dark roasting is something that is very important for us to understand. Important for us to not be judgmental against or for, to understand that it's a style and that roasting coffee is not a moral quandary, but instead an aesthetic. And even though this aesthetic might be a dark art, it's something that we should definitely understand and grasp and be able to make clear, conscious choices as to how to approach a dark roast or how to control a dark roast, and what does dark roast even mean. So the three of us sat down a little bit ago and kind of talked about, what does dark roast even mean? What does dark roast mean to you two?
Well, to me, it has to do with where I'm dropping the coffee in its development inside the drum. And so I generally consider things dark roasted when they have hit second crack. Whether they've made it all the way through or not doesn't really matter. I sort of consider second crack dark. But in the shop, I can't say that to people. So in that case, it's about flavor profile. And I might call something that's actually more of a medium roast, a dark roast, to someone to sell a cup of coffee, because they'll still like it and they won't know the difference.
And it's maybe darker than your others.
Yeah, but it's not to that second crack. So it's a context game there.
Definitely. How about for you?
I can say the same thing. And then I think that it's just when people buy my coffee, they kind of just want that more, I guess, bold is the term they use. And the more bitter flavors, more ashy, and the darker bean, that's kind of what they look for. But they don't really understand the dropping time periods and things like that. So
Totally, yeah. There is a very different language that we use in roasting circles than our consumer circles would use. The key here is that a dark roast is going to be relative. So you have to figure out for your own company what that darkness is relative to. As a roaster, as pointed out, that dark roast is going to be generally relative to second crack. When does second crack occur. How long has it been since first crack has occurred to second crack? Because if you approach from first crack to second crack very slowly, then even though you're moving into second crack, you probably aren't going to get very strong, robust dark roast flavors. If you move very quickly, you will get very strong dark roast, robust flavors. And then once second crack has occurred, how deep into second crack or through second crack are you going to take the coffee? It's not, as we've covered in other episodes, it's not a matter of you calling me and saying, hey, what temperature should I drop this to make it a dark roast? That is also going to be very relative to your roaster, your drum. And the deeper you get into a roast, the higher those temperatures go on your temperature probe, the more relativity there's going to be, and the more change is going to occur on a coffee bean from 1 degree to the next degree. So if your first crack is taking place at 375, for instance, the difference between 375 and 376 is minuscule. However, as you get into a dark roast, that difference between 440 and 442 is very big. It's going to have a lot of flavor change. So it's important for you as you are roasting dark and thinking about roasting dark that you understand that it's a delicate process, even though it's a robust and very intense flavor experience. So relativity, figure out where your dark roast is and what it is that you are calling a dark roast and why. And then figure out when your customer is coming to you and saying, I want a dark roast, what is it that they mean? What is that relative to? Do they think that Starbucks is light? Do they think that Folgers is the flavor that they're wanting to go for? So finding some context so that you can pin your relative dark roast to their expectations is really important. Another thing we talked about was how to go about choosing a coffee for a dark roast, because it may be the case that a dark roast may be appropriate for a certain coffee, it may be inappropriate for another, and there may be a coffee that you can roast light all the way through dark, so on and so forth. How do you all think about that?
I have sort of general rules that I go by.
I like rules. Rules are good.
But of course, there are exceptions to every rule, so that is, not the way for everyone to live their lives. But I tend to say that there are certain beans that will take more heat. I find that things from Indonesia take heat very, very well. But I've had a couple that don't at all. I've had washed versus naturals of the same coffee that take heat very, very differently. And so I tend to be more inclined to roast the washed one darker if that's my intent. So sometimes it's a regional thing, sometimes it's a processing thing. And then also for the context of where that coffee's going to end up. So for blends, maybe one aspect of it needs to be roasted a little heavier, if you will, than another.
How about for you?
I haven't really dabbled with different beans to play around with dark roast to see which ones would take more. But I have done exactly what you said with the blends, where I've had coffees where I do some in the medium roast and then I'll do some a little bit darker just to add in a different flavor profile to my blends. So that's kind of what I do. But I don't really do anything specifically dark.
Got it. Yeah, there is a paradox that I find for a lot of people that are trying to come up with a dark roast. On the one side, when you're roasting dark, generally you're roasting for the flavor profile of dark coffee. You're not roasting to bring out a floral note in Ethiopia or a caramelly note in a Guatemala. So what a lot of people will gravitate toward is just a cheap coffee, right? Because we're going to burn it and we're going to make it taste like dark coffee. So a lot of people will gravitate toward that cheaper coffee, but were they to spring for one of those Ethiopias that have a nice floral characteristic or Guat that has a nice caramel characteristic, those coffees will hold up to a darker roast. You can roast them much more darkly and have a much better tasting product at the end of that. They won't get out of control as easily. They'll take on heat better. So that's another thing to consider as you are thinking about dark roasting, is not only the style and proximity to second crack that you're getting to, but also, are you wanting that dark roast to be a really high quality dark roast? And I think one of the reasons that a lot of your higher end specialty coffee markets or companies have kind of strayed away from the dark roast is that dark roast space is inhabited by all of the big companies that are out there. And so if you're on the shelf with the dark roast up against all of these other giants that people are used to tasting, it's very difficult to differentiate yourself in that space and to size up, especially if you're using a high quality coffee and it costs a lot more. So there's this balance that has to be struck of, do I want to inhabit this space? And if I do, what's the price point going to look like? And then if it's similar price point, once somebody gets it off the shelf, is it going to taste better than the competition? Is somebody going to say, wow, I'm really glad I made that choice when they're sitting down with that cup of coffee? So it's a difficult balance for us specialty roasters to walk. A lot of times people will choose that coffee because it's local or because it's organic or because of something else other than just branding. So once they make that choice, you want to capitalize on that choice and be the best flavor there. So my advice is always to favor quality over anything else. And if you're going to do a dark roast, getting a nice coffee, it doesn't have to be the most expensive coffee, but getting a nice hard bean that is high grown and trying to maintain at least some of the integrity of where that coffee came from in the flavor profile, while also adding to it the nuance of darkness or maybe smoke or tobacco or whatever it is that they're looking for, is a really smart way to go. So as it pertains to that, do you all have any insights into when somebody is coming to you asking for a dark roast? What is it that they're typically looking for?
I think they're looking for something that's kind of idiot proof.
Okay.
To use one of my favorite terms. Something that you're not going to screw up brewing at home. We all know that when you go out to a coffee shop, you expect a perfect cup of coffee because this is a professional who's crafted this beverage for me. Mm-hmm. When we're home and we're dumping grounds into a French press in the morning, we don't want to have to think about it that much. We're not necessarily using scales. We're using a tablespoon and maybe a blade grinder. Mm-hmm. And these are all factors that can vary very widely day to day. And with a darker coffee, you're going to have less variance in the final cup. Definitely. Of course, there will be variance still, but taste-wise, it'll be a lot more even keel than that lightly roasted geisha. Mm-hmm. You're not going to put that in your French press.
Yeah, I have French pressed some geishas, but
we won't talk about that.
How about for you?
I just think that people are kind of looking for that consistent, I don't want to say bitter, but that coffee that just tastes the same kind of wherever you go. Mm-hmm. And dark roast is something you can find that kind of, if it's just burnt, kind of tastes the same everywhere. So I feel like that's like a safe bet for people to go to, like their safe zone. If they're going to put the money down, like they want to do something that's kind of safe and that they'll know they'll kind of get the same product or taste from that product out of like different brands or whatever. So when they try your product, they're not getting something completely different than what they've had before or things like that. So
right.
I also think acidity is probably a pretty big part of it. Is a lot of people say, oh, I don't like acidic coffees.
Or their stomachs like can't
Yeah,
handle it.
and so that sort of circumvents that issue a little bit.
Right around it, yeah.
Yeah, the term I like to use is nostalgic flavor. That flavor that harkens back to when somebody first tasted coffee and all of the coffee experiences kind of amalgamating into one. That ubiquitous coffee flavor that people expect and anticipate. And if you think about that, in most of us, especially speaking from maybe a United States perspective, that's the flavor of coffee that we know from our childhood generally, you know. That's the flavor, like you guys said, of safety and all of those things. Another,
Before flavor, it's the smell.
Yeah.
yeah, yep.
It's like the most widely recognized smell.
Right.
And all of the aromatic compounds, especially of a dark roasted coffee, they're going to be really pungent on the nose. It's going to
Yeah.
strike
Right
you.
back, right.
Yep.
Definitely. Another really good point that Steve brought up while we were talking about this, Steve Green, the owner of Mill City, is that those darker roasts are easier to extract. If you're using a home brewing system, you're probably not going to have high quality water. It's probably not going to be a temperature. You're probably going to be using very little coffee to a whole lot of water. So you're really relying upon that coffee to have a strong punch, to punch through that low level of solvent in your extraction. So leaning into a darker roast is going to make a lot of sense. A lot of our really light roast coffees that may taste fantastic in a cafe, honestly, don't taste good on a Mr. Coffee. I've tried, travel around and visit family and grind my beautiful beans, and next thing I know, I'm drinking something that tastes like grass and
Paper.
and yeah, it's just not good. So thinking empathetically too about how your customer is going to be extracting the coffee that it is that you're providing may lead you to some conclusions that you might be roasting too light, especially if you are serving your coffee primarily as a whole bean product and selling that coffee to people that are primarily brewing at home. I make the argument very strongly that you should be tasting the coffee in a way that is similar to your customer. That should be the case regardless of who your customer is. You should, if you're selling your coffee in a cafe setting, you should taste your coffee on that brewer. If you're selling it to a home brewer, you should taste your coffee through some really crappy.
Coffee drip.
Yep, exactly.
Honestly, a Mr. Coffee at Target is like $20.
Yeah,
It's kind of worth it.
it's a good investment.
Right.
It is really
you say
interesting to drink these coffees
Yeah.
on a Mr. Coffee.
Yep, with
know?
tap water.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's key.
And I think that you'll find that a darker roasted coffee is going to taste more like coffee than a lighter roasted coffee
And
will.
it'll be more consistent,
Right.
generally.
So when you all are approaching a dark roast, do you have a particular methodology of roasting or any kind of methodologies to share?
So I just totally approach it differently than like my beautiful single origin, fruity, lovely, light, floral things. So when I originally was taught how to roast, the guy who sort of gave me the skeleton framework and then unleashed me on his business, he was roasting things very, very dark. And I had no idea what a rate of rise even was. So that wasn't even on my radar. And there were just certain marks that I was supposed to hit at certain times. But the big focus was on first crack to second crack and how they interact, whether there is, a good amount of time between or not. And at that point, it didn't even really occur to me to start dropping these coffees earlier. So I was playing with that a lot, and just sort of seeing the differences I got. And finding that, and now I know that it was because my rate of rise was just dropping off, that I was baking coffee a lot.
Yep.
And
But people still drink it.
maybe
not in your shop.
I don't know. I mean, I definitely realized though that like that was happening, and
Right.
you know, to counter that, yeah. So that is now that I don't really take anything to second crack. If I were to go home tomorrow and say I'm gonna roast this El Salvador and take it to second crack, I would make sure not to let it lag like that. But then it would be about like how far into seconds do I want to drop it, and that's a huge question.
The pending question. How about for you?
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing with paying attention to the gap between first and second crack, and then for me, like I agree, I don't really take anything into second crack, but I think when I play around and do take it into second crack, I look for like the rolling second crack, and then if I wanted to get really dark just to play around, I look for like the bean afterwards, like the oils on it. But I really don't sell anything that dark.
Yeah, special request only.
Yeah, or if I'm just like having some time to play around with the machine and
Which is very important.
just see and then taste it just for giggles. So.
Well,
it was the most fun part about seasoning our machine was
Yes,
yeah.
I know. that
killing
is
some beans dead
and just seeing the product come
watching
out.
the whole experience.
Did you experience
Life
third
and
crack?
death of.
No.
I've only heard third crack once. I thought it was a myth.
I think it is a myth. Are you lying
No,
to us?
I'm not lying. There was a coffee, I swear it went into a third crack. Somebody walked away from the drum, left the coffee in the roaster, and we turned around and the coffee roaster was smoking blue smoke from every corner.
Yeah.
And sure enough, it was cracking a third time.
So had they
I think it was catching on
exploded
fire.
a little
Yeah,
bit?
I
I
was
was
gonna
gonna
Oh yeah, they
They
were.
were just pulverized.
Yeah, they were very
Fascinating.
large and very black. So I'm going to share a couple of, I guess, theories or methods of roasting dark with you all. One thing that I want to touch on, though, that Steve reminded me of right before this is there is a very big trend right now, which I think is a positive trend in a lot of ways, to maintain a declining rate of rise. So in other words, if your rate of rise at the turnaround comes out of turnaround and hits at 20 degrees per 30 seconds, which is really fast, by the way, and at that point, you never want to go beyond 20 degrees per 30 seconds. In fact, you want to slowly back off of that as your curve is, I guess you guys need to look at the curve this way. As your curve is coming up, the temperature of your system is a set temperature. The temperature of your air is kind of going to rise and then plateau most likely. So as your coffee is coming to meet that set temperature, it's going to do so in a declining fashion. In other words, the tension between the distances of temperature is going to be less and less as they approach each other. If you think about there being an elastic band between two things that are pulled apart, that's kind of what energy is treating the coffee and roaster with. So your coffee's down here, your roaster's up here. This temperature is pulling the coffee up to meet the roaster. If you set your temperature in such a way, you really honestly don't even have to make gas adjustments during your roast in order to get your roast to come up, go through first crack, and get to the point where it can drop. And eventually your coffee will no longer gather momentum. If your roaster system is really low in energy, if you start your roaster off at 200 degrees, for instance, you'll never hit first crack. It'll just turn maybe yellow and hang out there. That's what baking is technically. So with that declining rate of rise, if you implement that kind of a theory to a dark roast, you're going to miss the mark, because all of a sudden you're declining through first crack, and after first crack and 2 minutes after first crack, how much more energy do you have left in your system? Now all of a sudden you're faced with, I'm supposed to turn my gas up, but that book that I read said that I can't turn my gas up. What am I doing? Now I'm doing something wrong. So then there is one way to breach that, and that's to turn your gas up. There's another way to breach that, and that's to approach first crack really fast. So then you're cruising through first crack, you're cruising through post first crack and into second crack. Now all of a sudden second crack's unfolding, and remember how I said that distance in temperature, 1 degree to another, is so much greater in impact in those darker roast moments? Now it's out of control. So how do you fix that? Well, the answer is, don't worry about the declining rate of rise on a darker roast. Make sure that you are tasting your coffee at different roast levels. So maybe roast that coffee the way that it should be roasted in your mind, to where you're exemplifying natural flavor in the coffee, the way that you might roast it to City Plus or even Full City. And then look at that curve and say, okay, I went through first crack at this rate of rise, at 5 degrees per 30 seconds. I went through first crack. Do that again. And if you're roasting it dark on this second try, go all the way through first crack in the same way that you would have gone through first crack, but then use your burner in a way that maintains energy and doesn't allow your coffee to just die. Don't be afraid to turn up your gas. It's okay. The other method is try to maybe speed first crack up a little bit, knowing that your end goal is to have a darker roast. Your end goal is not necessarily to capture some of what was in that lighter roast and then add darkness to it, but your goal is simply the flavor of the dark roast. So go ahead and allow it to move through first crack a little faster, but think about it from the context that I've just laid out, so that you're not just simply trying to abide by a rule that may or may not have its place with this style of roasting. There's also another method that is an old school method of adding roast-like characteristic to a roast, and this is called the quote-unquote aroma roast. The aroma roast, and you'll find this on some of the older machines, especially a Probot, on the, it's a big dial to dampen the air. It'll actually say aroma roast or aroma on it or something of that nature. It's usually in German. And although aroma is still going to be aroma. And basically what you do is you close off the air. So you get it to the point where you think it should drop, turn off the burner, close off the air, and then essentially smoke the coffee in its own smoke. So you can roast it to a lighter degree, turn off the burner, close off the air, and then just pump some roast flavor into the coffee. Do I recommend this? I recommend trying it as a roaster because it's pretty cool and it is a method that exists, and I want you to be aware of it. I think that you probably could find some good results that have some maintained origin flavor characteristics and have some added smoke characteristics, but I don't know that if I was to run a company, we would do this method of roasting. But it exists, and I wanted you to know about it. Any questions from you all so far? Any questions from the audience so far?
We're kind of hitting them as we go.
Okay, Nick's nodding his head that we don't have any questions that we have not covered so far.
Exactly.
So,
Great.
you all good so far?
Yeah.
All right, cool. We're cruising right along. So another thing that I wanted to talk about is where might it be appropriate for us to roast darker?
Depends on your clientele.
Okay.
If you're going to go visit your grandparents, it's totally worth it to roast a batch a little darker and bring that with you.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there are generational things, and I think that a lot of times we as roasters roast what we want our customers to want, and maybe not roast what our customers actually want. We may handcuff ourselves a little bit, or maybe a better term would be bottleneck the entry point into our businesses by kind of alienating some people with our roast methodologies. So in your companies, of the coffees that you roast, which I know you said you don't roast too dark, but of the coffees that you roast, the more dark roasted ones, what are those and how do you use them?
Well, right now what I kind of have, what's darker, is Peru and Guatemala. And what was the second question?
And how do you use that? Like, what, is it just a blend or is it?
Oh, yeah, well, I'll use it, like, if I roast it a little bit darker, I'll put it in a blend with, like, Ethiopia or something to tone it down.
Okay.
Or I'll just have it by itself. And I use, like, if I was brewing it, like, for Guatemala, I'll make, like, a cold brew, but it still won't be super dark. But I think what is dark to some people is kind of like medium to me.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, so if you think about a dark roast, and I'll ask you the same question in a moment. If you think about a dark roast, that darker seed is going to be more brittle, okay? And the products in that seed have now broken down further so that those flavor molecules are now smaller molecules. Well, smaller molecules are easier for water to extract, firstly. Secondly, as you roast that coffee, it expands larger and the porosity of that coffee opens up more. Thirdly, it's more brittle, so when it goes through a grinder, it's going to fracture into smaller pieces. This is why a dark roast is more soluble. So implementing a darker roast for cold brew is really smart because cold water is not as efficient at creating a solution. It's not as efficient at dissolving particles and extracting those particles from your coffee. So if you roast it a little darker, you can extract much more easily. How about for you?
So we created a blend that we decided, like, we're gonna create this blend that is for us dark, and really for specialty coffee in Colorado Springs, where we're located, it is on the dark side of things, because we found your average Joe coming in asking for a cup of Joe, and we always keep two things on drip, and we would go through we have two beautiful coffees for you today. We have one Guatemala that is on the chocolatey, the yada yada scale, and then one that's like this crazy fruity. And so many people were like, I just want a cup of coffee.
Yep.
So we created this blend as that cup of coffee, and you know, after 10 years of serving people, you can sort of spot that a mile away, and you just pump that coffee for them. It's interesting that you bring up the brittleness of a darker roast, because that some people would argue is better for espresso. And our friend Matt Perger might argue that because you're actually going to get more fines potentially, that'll give you a rounder, you'll get more of the full round and smooth in your espresso, which is really what people are typically looking for, as opposed to the like bright acidic sort of slap in the face. Yeah, less sharpness from an acidic side, more of like the round, bitter, sort of enveloping,
Right.
which you can get from that.
Or what somebody may call full-bodied.
Yes.
Or what they may call strong. Those terms that we coffee professionals don't use very often, but our consumer base has been taught to use these terms quite a bit. Yeah, espresso is definitely a place where you see a lot of dark roasts used. Usually in a company, especially a specialty coffee company, their darkest roast is going to be an espresso blend or an espresso roast. There are a few different reasons for that. One is definitely that ability to grind it finer and have more consistency. Another is espresso kind of acts like a microscope for flavor. And you'll take a flavor that you might have in a drip coffee, for instance, put it into an espresso machine, and all of a sudden that little hint of lemon is just like you said, slapping you in the face.
Right.
It's just like
Been there.
Amplified.
yeah, totally amplified. So how do you tame those really intense flavors? Well, you roast it a little bit darker. As you are roasting, as your roast curve comes up, certain flavors die. And one of those is acidity. Acidity kind of comes down like this, and then it just crashes and burns as you get deeper into your darker roast. There are some acids technically that increase as you roast darker, but those acids are generally bad tasting acid, like quinic acid and acetic acid. Acetic acid is technically vinegar, and quinic acid, if you want to know what that tastes like, what's the name I'm trying to think of? The soda water. Tonic water, thank you.
It's like quinine.
Yeah, it's quinine. Yeah. So if you take all of the positive things in soda water, or in tonic water, and take that out, you're left with this bitter horribleness, and that's quinic acid. So those flavors are growing. You have these negative bitter flavors growing. You have these positive acidities dying, and you have the sweetness kind of comes up and then drops off as well. So it's an art, it truly is an art to try to find a dark roast that will maintain some of those notes of acidity, maintain some of that sweetness, while also adding some of that bitterness and robustness from a consumer standpoint. And espresso really does that. If you roast it darker, put it through the espresso machine, that acidity that is still there in a dark roast will still come through in the cup. Pretty interesting. Cool. Have we had any questions yet?
We had one question about, that's kind of been repeated here. I'm going to stop listening to you while I'm trying to talk to you. What technique are you using to go darker for a more, let's say, palatable dark roast? If you're trying to hit this comfort cup, this nostalgia cup, is it origin, is it technique, is it a combination of both?
So the question is, how do we approach a dark roast in a way that maintains palatability? Or I would maybe change that phrasing to, I'm sorry if I'm putting words in your mouth or reading too much into this, but maintaining the characteristics that are intrinsic to that coffee while also adding that roast-like characteristic. I really look at this from a perspective, which I'm not a chef, but from a chef-like perspective. A chef has these really far out crazy ideas with ingredients that frankly are pretty disgusting generally. The palate of a chef is a very strange and dark place you usually don't want to go. And that's typically how roasters are with like really light roasts, very exotic flavors, and we're disconnected from the populace. But a chef's job is to take this hypothetical idea and put it into a context that allows somebody that's eating that plate to feel comfortable. So how do you do that with a dark roast?
The first thing that kind of popped in my head would be a blend. So taking something darker than normal, so you get more of those ashy, less acidic flavor notes or whatever, and then having another blend that's more of a medium, put them together and blend it together, and then you can kind of meet halfway with both. That's an option.
I dig it.
I feel like it has everything to do with sourcing your beans and looking for beans that will inherently have qualities that will complement, the roasty flavor will complement that. So I don't think that roasty necessarily complements Meyer lemon. In my mind, those don't connect. But roasty, like pipe tobacco and dark chocolate totally go together. So where does that leave us? Okay, well, Just from, roasting lots of coffee, I would go like Costa Rica, Guatemala, maybe Indonesia if I want to do something a little funkier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so again, we're talking about flavor characteristics. So again, putting it into a chef perspective, this might get a little heady, I apologize, but from a chef perspective, let's think about flavor. A chef can derive a flavor from multiple sources. Let's say she's looking for the flavor of licorice. Well, you can get that from licorice root. You can get that from fennel, from the fronds of fennel or from the bulb of fennel. You can get that from anise, star anise or anise seed. You can get that from the seed of fennel. There are all these places that you can derive this note that you're looking for. So from her perspective, it's take different coffees that have the notes that you're looking for and arrange those in a way to where those notes are coming out in strength and in weakness, in chorus or harmony with each other. And from your perspective, taking one seed that may have attributes of all of those things, so a very high quality coffee, and just roasting it to one area where those are still present. And there are different ways of even doing that. So for instance, if you have a coffee that you know has attributes that are going to be tobacco-like or chocolate-like, if you roast that too fast or too hard, you know that that's going to get burned out. So finding that balance of speed as you're moving into second crack, and then finding the point in second crack at which those flavors no longer exist. So if all of this is going to be kind of a tug of war where we're borrowing from one coffee or borrowing from one flavor in a particular coffee, and then while we're getting that flavor built into the seed, another flavor is diminishing. And so finding that balance for each seed. So from a roaster perspective, I think about light roasts in terms of like knocking on the coffee's door and asking who's home and saying, what do you have to offer me? What are the notes that are in you, little coffee bean? And how do I find those and achieve those and find them over and over every time I'm roasting? Whereas with a dark roast, that is more me telling the coffee what to do. These are the flavors that I want. Yep.
It's a totally different mindset.
Yes. These are the flavors that I want. I know all of these coffees and what they have to offer me. How do I get this flavor from this coffee or these flavors from this coffee in the same mindset or in the same package together harmoniously? That truly is where we as roasters shine. That's the work. That's the job of being a roaster. Roasting a coffee just simply to unleash just what is there raw, we can teach a child how to do that, but a child is going to take a lot more time and a lot more hours to put together a beverage that has the flavors that they want it to have. So how do you do that? Well, a lot of time, a lot of tasting, a lot of development, a lot of different palates, understanding all of the attributes that your coffees bring to the table, being able to comprehend those flavors and how those flavors were achieved, and then figuring out a roast set that will maximize those in the cup to where somebody who's not a coffee professional will be able to taste that cup and say, wow, that's super chocolatey. And then when you achieve that and you hear that feedback from a customer, talk about being amped.
Yeah. Great.
That's
success.
pretty awesome. Yes. Any other questions? That was a really long-winded answer.
I think we've hit a lot of stuff.
Okay, good.
Yeah. We've kind of steamrolled right over all the questions as we just continue down. So.
Okay. Nick is saying we've kind of rolled through a lot of the questions. If there are lingering questions that you have on this topic or any of the topics that we cover in Roaster School, please hit us up. And if there are other areas that you wish for us to cover, please hit us up on that too, because content is derived by need, and we want to know what your needs are out there. Do you all have anything to add before we wrap? Well, thank you all so much for being here,
Yeah.
traveling so far, and
Thanks
hanging
for
out with
having
us
us.
today. Yeah, and hopefully we'll see you on another episode.
2 things.
Oh wait, 2 things.
Roaster School, year 1 quiz. Welcome to
Oh
year 2.
yeah.
So make sure that everybody knows to hop on our Facebook, follow us in the description on YouTube. There's a quiz, free certificate, personalized with your name. At the same time, the biggest question for either of you, two lovely people, do you know who Joe refers to himself as in
Oh my
episode
gosh.
2 of Roaster School?
No. Oh, this.
You need a microphone.
Probably.
Yeah.
Who you
Here,
refer to yourself as?
come on over.
Do you remember?
You're gonna be on camera.
Oh yeah, that's what I'm always interested in. We've had a considerable amount of people wondering exactly what the correct answer is to this. Joe, do you remember who you are?
Oh yeah.
For the mic?
I would hope you remember.
Who are you? Say
Wait,
to the
is
camera.
it?
The Bob Ross of.
The Bob Ross.
Yes.
Unfortunately, not the Margaret Thatcher.
No.
Wait, what are your catchphrases?
Oh, I don't know. We'll have to
We're
go
gonna
through the,
definitely
we're
work
gonna
on
have to go
that.
through the film.
Little tree right here.
Yep. Uh-huh. No, I was like drawing the
happy
drawing
little
the old
beans.
profile and yep. So what Nick was saying a moment ago is if you have attended all of our roaster school episodes for the first year, you can jump online. Well, anybody can jump online and do this and try your hand at it, but you can jump online and look us up on Facebook and take a quiz. And if you successfully pass that quiz, you'll get a certificate with your name on it that says you have completed year 1 of the roaster school or something of that sort. Cool. Well, that's it for this week and this month, and we will see you next month. So please tune back in and hit us up with questions. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.